Colonel Lamar Davis. Good morning, Colonel.
Good morning, Mr. Acting Chair. Good morning, committee members. Colonel Lamar Davis, Deputy Secretary of Department of Public Safety Services, Superintendent, Louisiana State Police.
You have any statements or just here for questions?
Actually, both. Before I begin, I do want to again acknowledge Ms. Harden and the Greene family. There's nothing I can say here today that will fill the hole in their hearts. As I've said, day one, my heart goes out to them. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about this. I don't think about Mr. Greene. I don't think about our involvement. I don't think about their pain. And I want them to know, and I want you all to know, that every day that I come, every day I put this uniform on, every day that I come to work, I come with the primary purpose of making our agency better, making us an agency that not only that everybody can be proud of, but that we can provide a service to all of our citizens, all of our visitors. And I want everybody to feel comfortable when they see our uniform that we're going to provide that service. We're going to help them. And that's what I need everybody to know. With that said, since being here, 2 years, I've done extensive, and I continue to do extensive assessment of our organization. And during that time, there's obviously many things that I found that we could do a lot better. And I can go down the list. I will cover some of those major aspects of it. But during that time, I have worked not only individually and worked with my leaders, but worked with other organizations to get an assessment done. Everyone knows that we have DOJ that's conducting the patterns in practice. That's no secret. But I've also took it a step further. I've commissioned an organization to come in and do a top-to-bottom assessment of our organization. And that's because I believe that that's what's best. Not only from my experience, whether it be militarily or recently or back then when I came on this organization, we were getting assessments conducted, and those were some of the foundations that allowed us and assisted us in becoming an agency that we built. But with that, I know that information is going to help us move forward. And not only just move forward with best practices, move forward with doing things in a manner that is consistent with what our communities expect, what our leaders expect, and so forth. Some of those things that we've done is I've reviewed our policies, and quite frankly, there's a lot of work to be done with our policies. There are some gaps within how we were administering policies and expecting people to abide by those policies without conducting that training. And I've since commissioned and created a policy section, expanded that policy section so that we can have people that is their primary job, not just another job of many others. We've also looked at our use of force and the administration, the processing of our use of force procedures. And that's another area that, again, that we're working to build, and not just build broadly. I mean specifically ensuring that our personnel complete the forms that they're supposed to complete, ensuring that our supervisors are holding them accountable, and then we're holding our supervisors accountable. And as we do that, then what you see is a better interaction with our citizens. You see more accountability throughout our section. You're going to see more transparency throughout our agency. And those are just some of the areas that we are working on. But beyond just the use of force area, we're looking at our entire department. We're looking at promotions. We're looking at hiring. We're looking at every aspect of our agency. And again, as we begin and continue to improve those areas, then what you will find is you will get better interactions with our communities. I tell our personnel that every interaction that we have is an opportunity for us to change lives. We can't go out there with the idea that it's us against them, that we are different because we're the same. We just happen to wear a uniform. We just happen to be trained in what we're trained in. But it's important for us to go out there with the mindset and with the heart of compassion and empathy to ensure that we are providing a service to our communities. And as we do that, then what you'll find is we begin to impact lives, change lives, and save lives. And that's the ultimate goal of what we do. So, and again, my last 2 years, I've really worked hard at really emphasizing that. Some of the other areas that I really wanted to tap into was really implicit bias training and some of those other areas to allow us to tap into resources and understandings of different cultures. And I think that's important because as we've seen, and anyone that's traveled Louisiana, they will tell you that every hour you travel, regardless of direction, you're going to change a culture. You're going to change cultures. And as you do, then as state troopers, then we have to be prepared to actually interact with those cultures and do so in a positive manner that elicits a positive outcome. And I believe that as we do that, again, we save lives. And that's the ultimate goal of what we should be doing, is saving lives. So by bringing those trainings, and not just implicit bias training, that's not where it stops. We're building our de-escalation program. We've been actually, since being appointed, we've applied for and been accepted into Georgetown Law's de-escalation program, their ABLE program. And I think this is something, once we get it throughout the agency, that will further assist us in growing our personnel, growing our response, growing how we interact with our citizens, and then from there getting and eliciting those positive outcomes. We are a very good organization. We have men and women that will go and do things and run to a fight and run and put themselves in harm's way when many others wouldn't. And I applaud them for that. But as the leaders of this organization, it's our responsibility that we give them the tools, we give them the resources, we give them the support, we give them the training, and we give them the expectations on how they are to do that. And I hope that you all have and continue to see that's exactly what I'm aiming to do. As I mentioned before, every day I come to this job, I come with the main mission of making our agency better, making our individuals better, making our troopers better. And then creating an atmosphere where we're working with our communities, not working against them, but working with them so that we can all keep our communities safe. And that's what we've been doing. As we move forward, one of the main premises that I really wanted to emphasize on our agency is accountability. So one of the best ways that we've been able to do that is really by increasing our technology. We have since created a computer-aided dispatch for our entire agency and rolled it out to our entire agency. And for you as leaders and for our communities, what that does is that creates accountability at the lowest level of our organization. Everything we do is captured in that system, okay? But that also creates transparency. It helps us report back to you our activity, how we're performing our jobs, who we're stopping, how we're stopping them, and so forth. We did not have that capability prior to. Things were done on a spreadsheet. Things were sometimes not done at all and documented. And that's part of that change that we have to continue to forge, but not just with a computer-aided dispatcher, statewide records management system, also a e-crash solution for the entire state, for our entire agency, and a e-citation. And all of those systems, again, has the capability of creating statistics, creating a story and telling what we're doing, how we're doing it, how often we're doing it. And it gives you that information as our leaders. It gives our citizens that information. And by the way, we are going to make that information public. Okay? That's one of the main areas that we're working on, as well as transparency and building those platforms and building reports that would be public facing. So that is forthcoming along with these systems as we continue to implement these systems. I wish I could tell you that we are here today. We're there today. We're not. We have, in a matter of 3 to 4 years, implemented more technology than most agencies do in 7 years. But we're still not there yet. but I can assure you that is the pathway that we're moving. And as we do so, then my hope is that you all will feel comfortable that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, how we're supposed to be doing it. I would ask this. We, as I mentioned before, have a ton of men and women that go out there and they sacrifice their lives. They sacrifice times with their family. They sacrifice a great deal to perform this job. And I can assure you, I'm so fortunate, so happy that we have those men and women that are willing to do that. I ask that you all support and continue to support them. I ask that our communities continue to support them in performing that critical mission. Public safety, and we've said this before, is not a police-only job. It's not something that we can arrest our way out of. And what you will find with me, what you will find with my administration, what you will find with my agency is that we're not taking a only law enforcement approach. We're working with our communities. We are in our communities. We are volunteering with our communities, and we're working with our communities to ensure public safety. And we're working with all of our communities. So I really wanted you all to know that's where we are headed. There are some things that since I've come on, quite frankly, I didn't like. I didn't like that we didn't have consistency. I didn't like that we didn't have accountability throughout our ranks and throughout our leadership. And I made changes by changing the people. Not only changing the people, but changing the policies. And not only by changing the policies, but also continuing to reevaluate so we can continue to make changes. And as we do that, then we're going to be that great agency that we have the potential of being. So, again, my heart goes out to Ms. Horton because I hate that it took this for us to be moving in that direction. I hate that it took this for us to be making the changes that we're making. But I can assure you that we're making them. And I will not rest until we continue to be an agency where we should be. So with that, Mr. Acting Chair, I open the floor for any questions.
Thank you, Colonel. Representative Bacalao.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. First of all, let me preface my statements by saying that I don't think in the legislature you'll find a more supportive guy of law enforcement than I am, having served 37 years in law enforcement myself. And I see my Vice Chair comment. What? Equal is Representative Villio in her support, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Colonel, one of the things that was encouraging throughout these hearings was that I think most of us here who participated in this process have heard from dozens and dozens of line troopers. And most of the state troopers that we talk to who are not in positions of administrative authority were supportive of this committee. And I think it speaks highly of the average trooper coming to us and saying, there are problems that need to be fixed. We are as embarrassed as anyone about what our fellow troopers are doing. And honestly, one of the impressions that we get in talking to the line state trooper, the guy who's out there every day that you're talking about, putting his life out for his community, leaving his family life, working long, hard shifts, those guys are the ones who point out more than anyone the deficiencies of the administration of the department. They're the ones that are coming back and talking about our reputation is being ruined and there's a lack of accountability, not because the line trooper doesn't want it, because those in administrative positions weren't pressing it. So I am complimenting the troopers that you complimented, but in a different way. More than anyone, those troopers say we need changes in this department if we're going to continue to be the premier law enforcement department of the state of Louisiana. Something got to change at the top. And I'm just being frank with you. That's what I heard over and over again. And I could get more specific, but some of them were very specific about specific individuals who weren't doing their jobs at the top. They all knew it. Now we're talking about, as you talk about, implementing all these programs. I'm a little more simple than that. There was an attachment. Basically the entire investigation of Ronald Greene was left in the hands of sergeants. And we've had the opportunity now to review the journals. Other than the first few days after the incident, there were no entries. There was apparently it went for an extended period of time outside of the first month window or whatever, with no one getting an update even, or passing on an update. And it's that indifference toward the investigation that's disturbing to me. The other part, and I understand that there could be some complications, the poisonous fruits issues with sharing of information between IA and the criminal, but the fact that there was no communication between IA and criminal, if there had been, the investigation would have been complete. There wouldn't have been any videos that went undetected, and we could talk about that at length. But look, to me, the simple things to fix early, I don't need an outside entity to come in and say the colonels and the lieutenant colonels should be engaged in a criminal investigation that leads to death. That you should be reviewing everything, ensuring that information is shared. I'll kind of slow down a little bit and say that aside from that, how many warning signs do you need before this incident happened before you act? So we can talk about all these things, but some of it is guys in positions of authority just doing their job. And if you don't do your job, the agency is going to fall apart. And that's what I think, we could go on, and I could go through a litany of things where I think there were failures. But at the end of the day, people didn't care enough.
Let me just say, I could not agree with you more with regards to those failures you spoke of. And really the trooper's viewpoint, since being here, I've gone to every troop. I visited every shift. I have 9 troops across the state. I visited every shift, and I spoke with them in a small team setting because I wanted to get a good answer. Oftentimes, and you've been in law enforcement at a high level, oftentimes it's difficult when you come with an entourage of your senior staff for them to talk and want to be honest and upfront. And I've visited those troops with the idea of getting that information. And I've gotten a lot of that information. And now we're making those changes. Accountability is huge, especially supervisory accountability. And I've taken that seriously. With regards to any reports now, I've changed and created a force investigative unit that reports directly to me. We've set those processes in place, those policies in place, but more along the lines, we're educating our personnel, and then from there, we're responding. And I am the one where the buck stops. So I am reviewing reports, I'm reviewing videos, and I am making decisions. But I'm also holding our subordinate supervisors accountable. And I have since administered discipline because some, quite frankly, haven't performed their jobs as they should.
Well, let me inject, and I'll go back to probably the prime example, is you have a use of force, a trooper assigned to use of force, I can't recall his name, who reviewed the tapes, he described them most horribly, the tape of the incident with Greene. Mm-hmm. So you have a trooper. He's not a lieutenant. He's not a sergeant. If I recall, he said tortured murder. Mm-hmm. A trooper saying it, who feels so strongly about it upon viewing the videos, and yet again there's a detachment. If he felt that strongly, and look, whether we share his opinion or not is irrelevant. What we should know is that trooper's assessment didn't make it up the chain to the colonel. and I don't even know who at the highest level actually viewed the videos. Let's be clear. Even who at the top, knowing the videos existed, knowing even a trooper looks at these videos with such disdain, and apparently nobody at the top, at the highest level of the organization, even bothered to look at the videos. And to me, that is an outright, well, I won't even characterize. I'll let you comment.
Well, and I wish I could answer that and provide you an answer, but unfortunately I wasn't the superintendent at that time. And I can't speak for the prior superintendent. I can tell you now as we move forward that I am taking those matters seriously, that I am accountable to them, and I'm also holding my supervisors accountable. So I can assure you that we are doing that now.
Let me just let my colleagues,
Yes, sir.
I'll let them ask a few questions. I'll come back. I want to speak a little bit more, but I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Representative Bacala. And before we move on, I want to follow up on that. Colonel, look, I share some of the same sentiments that Representative Bacala expressed, and I had a couple of questions. So one of the questions is, you talked about the culture of the state, and as you go every hour, the culture changes. And so I really want to just know about the culture of state police, though, for a minute. You know, you're putting these policies in, but do you have enough time, one, and two, what assurances can you give us that if you're not around in the next 18 months when the administration changes, that these policies are going to withstand the test of time, one. And then sort of as a follow-up to that, if they can't, what assurances can you give us that the culture of state police won't revert to what it was at the time of the death of Ronald Greene?
Well, as far as our policies, and to be honest with you, a policy can be changed by a superintendent whenever a superintendent feels the need to change a policy. But when you're talking about changing culture, when you're talking about building compassion, building empathy, and things of that nature, there's multiple ways by which you do it, not just by policy. You do it by putting people in place that's also going to carry that vision forward. And that's exactly what we're doing. I'm promoting people that share my vision. That's how you change the culture and continue to change. But you also start at the beginning. You start with the troopers that you're bringing on to your agency. You start with the first line supervisors. You move on to your mid-level managers, and you complete that with your senior level people. And when they do not share that vision, then of course you try to change their behavior as it is different. But when you're changing culture, you hit it from all angles. That's why I'm visiting my troopers. That's why I'm putting people in place that share my vision. That's why I'm implementing policies. That's why I'm sending our troopers out to training more than they have been in the last several years, so that they can get some different perspective about 21st century policing. And as they bring that information back, I challenge them to help us change the agency. This is not a I change an agency. This is a we change an agency. But we're also working with the community to get their perspective, their viewpoints, and we bring that into our agency. That's how we change culture. And that's how we'll continue to change that culture. That culture will continue to change because I have people, regardless of whether I'm here or not, that will also continue to implement that change. And that's what's important. I'm not just looking at today. I'm looking at tomorrow. I'm looking at succession. I'm looking at the future of our agency, but also our communities. Because I also live in our communities. I drive in our communities. I work in our communities. So does my son. So does my wife. And I want to make sure that we have the right people out there that's serving our communities, not just policing our communities.
All right. Representative Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Colonel, I'm going to try to be as brief as possible, but let me first associate myself with the comments of Representative Bacala. Totally agree with the things that he said. Colonel, let me first begin. You know, you've urged us to continue to support the women and men who serve this great state as troopers. Right. And I couldn't agree with you more. But let me just reiterate that, none of us on this committee want to be here. we're here because Mr. Greene was treated not as a human being. He was not treated with dignity. He was not treated with respect. And so you mentioned accountability being important to you, and I'm encouraged to hear that. It's important to us too, and it's important to our speaker, and that's why this committee was formed. To date, Ms. Molnar has not been brought any closure. And while there may be accountability moving forward, I will speak for myself and say there has not been much accountability to those that allowed this incident to happen from state police. And thus far, there's certainly been no accountability from our criminal justice system. I know that process is still taking its course. But in my opinion, there's been very little accountability, and it's devastating that Ms. Molnar still can't bring closure to the situation. With that said, I've said publicly in the past, and I will reiterate it today, this heinous incident should not foreshadow the overwhelming number of women and men in state police who do their jobs admirably with commitment and dedication every single day. And I am thankful for the women and men. I have had the opportunity to interact with many of them who are just as disgusted and devastated at this incident as we are. And I don't think you'll find a more supportive group of people as you do in this room for our hardworking women and men in law enforcement. And I just want to reiterate to you and to all of the public, in my district, which is overwhelmingly African American, I do reiterate to them that the overwhelming majority of women and men in state police are good, honorable, decent people. And I'll say that today, and I thank them for their service. Transparency, Colonel, I'm glad to hear your commitment to transparency. I will just say, we have to be consistent, though, when we talk about transparency. We can't be selective. Sure. And then the last thing, I just wanted to, touch on the implicit bias training for a minute. So important. For those of us that have studied human behavior and bias, the truth is we all approach life with a bias. Sure. It's just real. As policymakers, we have a bias. In any profession, folks look through the lens with some sense of bias. Is implicit bias training now required for every state trooper? And is it a one and done type thing, or is it ongoing? Can you kind of walk me through what state police is doing with respect to implicit bias?
So yes, sir, it is required. And I, from the top down, inclusive of myself, have gone through implicit bias training. We will continue to keep that a part of our program because we think it's quite frankly, it's needed and it's beneficial to everybody in our agency. So yes, sir, every trooper has gone through implicit bias training, inclusive of myself, and we will continue to train our personnel in implicit bias training as we move forward.
Great. Thank you, Colonel. I might have more questions later, but appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sir.
Thank you, Representative Hughes. Representative Villio.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you, Colonel Davis, for being here.
Yes, ma'am.
And I want to thank my colleague, Representative Hughes, for his comments, as well as Representative Bacala and Representative Jordan. And I think we all do come united in this particular matter. When Representative Bacala talked about the lack of communication between IA and the criminal investigation, that's a fact that there was a lack of communication. But the real fact, as I understand the testimony to this committee throughout the year, is that that communication was blocked, and it was intentionally blocked. As I appreciate the testimony to this committee by Lane Barnum, and I apologize, I would normally use rank. Is it Colonel Barnum?
Yes, ma'am, Lieutenant Colonel.
As I appreciate the testimony of Lieutenant Colonel Barnum, he says he made that decision. I suspect someone made that decision for him, but the bottom line is the investigation was blocked between the two. Now, I appreciate the Garrity warning as much as anyone, but the Garrity warning has to do with statements. It doesn't have to do with the findings of the investigation. And had that investigation and the separation from the two not been blocked, maybe the video, Lieutenant Clary's video, would have been found and given to the DA. Maybe Lieutenant Clary's video would have been found earlier and given to the United States Attorney's Office. We'll never know that, but it's a direct result of the blocking of the two. So my question to you is, have you determined that that was a system failure within Louisiana State Police? And if so, since the formation of this committee, what, if anything, have you done to prevent that from happening again?
Thank you, ma'am. And while I can't speak to what Lieutenant Colonel Barnum stated, because I wasn't in charge at that time, I can tell you that based upon my assessment, yes, that's a system failure, because quite frankly, that's a decision that I should be making, or someone at my level should be making, with regards to that type of investigation. As such, since that time, Internal Affairs reports directly to me. Force Investigations reports directly to me. They communicate without, of course, violating any of the Garrity rules. And allowing that and having that communication allows them to perform their jobs as they should. But I've also set in policies to ensure that when a criminal investigation that's initiated by us gets to a certain point, then that allows our administrative investigations to move forward. And again, there's no block. With regards to body-worn camera, we've set in policies and processes to ensure that all body-worn camera and in-car camera systems and any other camera systems that's been introduced to a case is put into our system. And from there, certain people have access to that system. Now, when we have people that do not upload or miscategorize, then we hold them accountable. We discipline them. And that's to discourage them from miscategorizing, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally. It helps them do their job, which helps our internal affairs personnel do their jobs. But with the not only creation of our technology and business support section, we now have subject matter experts that understand and have the expertise to go by and look for certain patterns, look for certain cameras. So I've put in redundancy. And by having that redundancy in place, that is what helps us to identify fail points where someone, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally, miscategorized or didn't upload their camera footage. And it's those processes that's going to help us ensure that we're going to have accountability.
Because you agree with me, it's a matter of simply counting. If everyone is equipped with a body-worn camera, as I understand it, and or a dash cam camera, it's a matter of knowing who was on the scene, yes, and then counting to make sure we have all of those videos, correct?
That's correct. And when you look at some of the fail points, for instance, when the policy states that everyone that's involved in the use of force should fill out a form, and not everybody's filling out a form, well, that may lead other investigators who's investigating that case to not have all of the requisite information to know where to go and get some of that footage. So we have changed that information. We've changed those policies. We've changed those procedures to ensure that people are filling out the forms. They're completing their documents. They're uploading their cameras, footages wherever and whenever by policy. And then we also have redundancy and having people that go behind and check and audit to ensure that we have all of that information.
So the policies have been officially updated and or revised and distributed throughout the organization. Is that my understanding?
Yes, ma'am. But I can also tell you that as we continue, I have expanded my policy section, and we're now reviewing policies from other agencies who have gone through and who have operated on best practices. So I can assure you that we'll probably continue to change those policies as we get newer, better policies introduced.
Sure. And I appreciate that testimony. What about, you talked about potential mischaracterization of videos, and you talked about having experts involved in all of this. Is there any effort to create a unified way of labeling videos, for instance, whether it would be based on an item number or whether it would be based upon a location of the incident, etc., something that the same fields are being entered into by all officers on the scene in the same way, so that when you search for information in our videos, it's readily obtainable. Have we addressed that?
Yes, ma'am, and we have a systematic way of categorizing that, but it still takes the officer to categorize the video. Otherwise, it would just upload. When the officer charged their device, it would just automatically upload and may not have the same categorization. So we have people, when that's not performed in that manner, and whether it be officers incapacitated, what have you, if we know that that officer was on scene, but yet we can establish a timeline, then we can still have our auditors go and search for all audio or all footage to ensure that they're looking at all of it during that time frame. So it's not just about having that standardized categorization, because that is being done. We have a standardized way to categorize a video, but it still requires the officer or the trooper to categorize that video.
And as I appreciate your testimony, if an officer does so incorrectly, you have policies in place so that there can be an internal investigation into that. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. It may be an internal investigation depending on circumstances, or we may refer that to be a non-IA type case,
Sure.
But it definitely will be reviewed.
And can you tell us, is Lieutenant Clary still an employee of the state police?
Yes, ma'am.
Is he the only one who was on the scene that remains in the employ? Or are there others?
He and I believe Corey York, but I need to verify that.
And what position does Lieutenant Clary hold in the state police?
He's still a lieutenant.
And Lieutenant, is there any particular division that he oversees?
He's in patrol.
Patrol.
Yes, ma'am.
And is he one of the individuals that has received any type of promotion since you've become colonel?
No, ma'am.
Okay. What specific policies? One of the troubling issues that has also come to light is the system failure with regard to the wiping clean of cell phones. Certainly throughout the Las Vegas scandal, it was my understanding under Colonel Edmonston that was a policy that was to be corrected, and yet we faced again in Ronald Greene the destruction of what I consider to be evidence in this case, or arguably it certainly has left many to believe that there was the destruction of evidence. Can you state, since this oversight committee was put in place, what specific policies you've put in place to address that issue?
Well, with regards to how we sanitize phones and things of that nature, we have put a policy, upgraded our policy. I will get you that policy to show you, but I don't have it right here.
Thank you. And Colonel Davis, I know Representative Hughes discussed implicit bias training, and there's no question that implicit bias training is important, as is racial discrimination, as is racial profiling. But in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, what happened to Ronald Greene on this night was not a matter of implicit bias as much as it was a matter of unlawful use of force. And so with regard to excessive force and use of force training, I know that you mentioned that there is some changes in the training. Have those changes been implemented, or is that something that y'all are looking to do?
So I have created a 15-person force investigative unit in which all of them have been trained and now are certified in conducting use of force, officer-involved shooting type investigations. They have received great training from across the nation, from FLETC to some of the other better programs, and they are in place and they are now moving towards conducting. But conducting those
And I
types-
don't mean to interrupt you, but is that the top to bottom? I had a note to ask you who was doing, you had mentioned the top to bottom assessment in your statement. Is that the team that's doing the top to bottom assessment, or is that someone else?
No, ma'am. Those are troopers that are actually conducting those investigations. My top to bottom organization is called the Bowman Group.
The
Bowman.
BOLLMA.
BOWMAN group. That's the group that I have contracted with to do a top to bottom assessment.
Have they begun their assessment?
Yes, ma'am.
Have they given any timelines on what they intend to do? I guess, do we have a contract in place that lays out the scope and the timeline for their service?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that something that's available to this committee?
Yes, ma'am. I'll provide that to you after we leave here.
Thank you, Colonel Davis. I think that, well, let me just ask you, any other policy changes, personnel changes, if you could just state for this committee in terms of, and it's certainly going to be important when we go to prepare a report of our recommendations, are any specific policies, personnel changes, training, etc., outside of what we've talked about specifically today, have you implemented as a result of this committee's oversight?
Well, ma'am, really, as I mentioned before, I really started looking at making changes beforehand. But while going through the committee, as well as while speaking with the Bowman Group with regards to our assessment, we have made some changes. We've enhanced our body-worn camera, in-car camera policy, which now expands the types of incidents that shall be recorded. Provide clarity to the number of video reviewers by supervisors, clarify that actions that will be taken when misconduct is observed, and ensure that officers shall have their cameras on and ready to record at all times as dictated by policy. We mandated, obviously, implicit bias training. We're also, with regards to the body-worn camera, all lieutenants and below now, when they're in uniform, will have body-worn cameras on. And that's a change that we've made as a result as well. I think that's beneficial as well to make sure we've got more coverage. And as we've seen in really recent weeks, oftentimes without that body camera footage, you're missing valuable viewpoints of what occurred. We've looked at making changes and implementing de-escalation training and duty to intervene training at all LSP and DPS commission officers, in addition to our base curriculum. We're evaluating the implementation of a discipline matrix, and I think that's going to be huge as well, so that we can create consistency throughout discipline. I think people will be more adept to understanding and making changes to their behavior. All, as I mentioned before, and all additional to all patrol personnel, criminal investigations division personnel at the rank of lieutenant and below have been issued body-worn cameras. When working uniform capacity, they will comply with the LSP body-worn camera policy. Our technology and business support section is adding an in-car camera and body-worn camera, check the box, so that, again, we can have that redundancy in people making sure that we know, the supervisors know what to look for, as well as our auditors. Some of the other changes is creating a standardized early identification system for consistent tracking. So our early identification system is a system whereby when officers actually, whether they get involved in pursuit, uses of forces, complaints, and so forth, that information is communicated back to us. Well, creating a system and a consistent system helps our supervisors identify troopers that may be at risk for performing some of these or having some of these behaviors that we have experienced in the past. By identifying that early, we can capture that before we actually get into a situation that ends in a tragic result. So it's very important for us to really enhance our system there, our early identification system. Some of the other things that we've worked with the Post Council to add supplemental information to the post-employment status check report for terminations and involuntary resignations. And I think that's important because when we identify someone that quite frankly shouldn't be in law enforcement, we need to keep them out of law enforcement. And by providing that little checkbox, what it does is it now notifies other agencies that there is something that they need to look at before they hire this employee, so that we don't continue to have them going from agency to agency. We've implemented a duty to intervene policy since then, as well as expanded our use of force policy. So those are some of the things that we've done since, quite frankly, starting and really going through the changes here and really just having these conversations with you. As I mentioned before, I hate that we're here for the reasons we're here. But I can tell you, I feel good about the changes we're making, and I'm glad that we are making these changes because it is going to help us become the agency and really continue to be the agency that we should be.
And Colonel Davis, my emphasis on since the committee began its oversight was not to take credit for changes versus when you implemented them, et cetera. It was more to get for the record, and I appreciate that. It was more for the record of what has changed, so that we can know what still, in the event we have recommendations for further changes, so that we could know to address in the report. A couple of outstanding matters. As I recall, when we began the committee oversight, there was an issue of, for instance, Lieutenant Colonel Kane's phone, and I think that was taken for some type of forensic review, if I recall correctly. Can you update us on the status of that matter?
Well, quite frankly, that is still at the Inspector General's level, and I haven't received an update as of late.
So the phone issue and Lieutenant Colonel Kane, that is all still with the Inspector General.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much for appearing today.
Yes, ma'am. And I would like to make one other change to what we've done since. When we look at starting to create these changes, one of the things I noticed was it was kind of all over the place. I've since created a professional standards section now that is going to help us organize these changes. It's not just making changes on a whim. We are actually organizing how we're making changes. We're keeping records of what changes we're making, and then we're looking at how they're impacting the agency. And as we do that, then we can go back, and if we need to make changes back or revert back, then we can. But I've created a professional standards section and compliance section so that we can do a better job of categorizing and organizing our changes, and not just making changes just because someone is telling us we need to make changes, but do it in a systematic manner that helps our agency and helps guide our agency.
Thank you, Colonel Davis.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Representative Nelson.
Morning, Colonel. Thank you for being here. I don't need to beat a dead horse. I know my colleagues have kind of gone over most of this stuff. Just as kind of in the same line of questioning as Representative Villio, would it be possible for you to give us some kind of memo that just outlines all these changes that you've made, and maybe if you've had time to see whatever impact that these changes have had so far, since some of them might have been implemented a little while ago, but if you could maybe just give us a written document with all those things in there, it might be easier for our report, and then also might be easier for us moving forward. That's the only thing I was going to ask, and thank you very much.
Yes, sir. We'll provide that.
Thank you, Representative Nelson. Representative Bacala.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I think one of the things you have to do as an agency is go back and look carefully at this incident so you know what to fix. And since you're working toward those changes, I'm assuming that you have done so. You have looked closely at this. Now, let me just throw a few things out that, we have had access recently to the journals that were kept at that time. A couple of points within the journals, okay? 10 days after the incident, there's a note that says, in custody death dash review process question mark. So all that tells me is on 5/20/19, somebody's talking about what does the process look like, because there's a question mark. Review process question mark. 2 days later, 5/22/19, the top of the page is titled in custody death, 9:30 a.m. I suppose. Then a note below it, video issue, review past videos, realize there's a problem, must address immediately, with 2 asterisks, issue to comply with policy on camera issued by captain. New note, open IA investigation, then an arrow, suspend pending criminal, administrative leave, video audit of Hollingsworth history. If you go, then we after that, there's not much in the notes for many months. Actually, until 9/17 of 2020. Well, no, I take that back. There are some other, that was a different. But the point is, 12 days after this incident, it is obvious that people think there's a problem because it's discussed here with the notes, administrative leave, video audit of Hollingsworth history. But the most disturbing thing to me is, and it's a question mark, open IA investigation, suspended pending criminal. Now, right then and there, the message that I read from this is, let this guy or let whoever, now look, maybe some conclusion hadn't been drawn yet about whether the actions were within the law or not, within the policy or not. So I'm putting this in perspective. But the fact that you're leaving open the option that we're going to suspend the internal investigation pending a criminal investigation does one thing. It leaves open the possibility of leaving horrible officers on the streets. So I go back to the fact that the disconnect, and you can fire guys who don't break the law. You can fire guys for committing policy violations. So there's 2 different standards. But automatically you're holding yourself to the criminal standard if you're not conducting an IA investigation, which could also hold them to the policy standard, which is higher. You go to there's some notes, but really the next significant notes on this case are a year and 4 months later. Significant notes. There are bits and pieces in there. But suddenly, a year and 4 months later, June 2nd, 2020, maybe less than a year and something, but anyway, that's the date. Suddenly, the notes start gaining again. But what's the top of the note that it seems to be driving this set of notes, I'm assuming? The first note on June 2nd, 2020 said FBI conference call with JBE 5 p.m. And suddenly we're talking about this now that the FBI is engaged. I could go through the notes, and then 9/17 is apparently a real meeting takes place where in-depth discussion about this case. Not until 9/17/20. I won't read everything to you, but point is, as you're going through the process of identifying what went wrong so you can fix it, actually we might have more information about some of this than you do, and I don't know that we have the ability to share this information in more detail. We can decide if we want to go through this next set of notes. They're long. instances where body cam was turned off. One of those instances alleges he slapped somebody while in a driver course. Traffic stops, trooper assist, not policing, in-car cameras, unlawful orders, yada, yada. It goes on and on. But the point is, nothing was done. I mean, we can go through all the reasons and the policy problems and this, that, and the other, but the bottom line is people knew it was wrong, or things looked very suspicious. I go back to the trooper who first reviewed the camera footage, the use of force expert, but nobody did anything, which to me is the most egregious part of all this. Is nobody did anything. We don't know the motives for why. We don't know if it's bad policy. We don't know if it's intentionally trying to cover up. We don't know if it's just deliberate indifference. All we do know is nobody did anything. And even today, I don't know what remains open except the criminal investigation 3.5 years later. I guess it's 3.5 years later. Any comment? I mean, you gotta look back. So let me ask you this. Simplistic term. Let's don't talk about CAD and this, that, and the other. In a quick word, what went wrong and how do you fix it?
Leadership, and accountability. And how do you fix it is you take ownership of it. We touch it, we own it. And me as the agency head, whenever I put directives in place, whenever I put policies in place, then I enforce them, and I enforce them consistently as I can. And from there, that's how we fix it.
I just want somebody to recognize that time is important.
Yes, sir.
And especially when you have a situation where you might have someone on the street in your uniform, wearing your badge, holding your commission, who maybe shouldn't be doing so. How long does it take to say, I'm sorry, you can't work here anymore?
Sir.
How long? How many days do we let them police when they shouldn't be in a badge? Now, there really is a question. I'm just saying, what is acceptable now?
And
I mean, to me, 2 days is not acceptable. Is about the limit of what I would say is acceptable. Get in, look at the video. We're gonna make a call right now. What happens? I know you guys have, when your policies start getting in the way, then they're in the way. I know there are protections and all that sort of stuff, but I'm just asking the question, and I really mean it. How long should we expect an investigation, investigation to take before action should be expected? I think there ought to be a standard.
Well, and I think that standard has been created by the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights. And as far as making that decision, then we make that decision based upon all available information and evidence and facts. And I don't think that it's prudent for us as an agency head to make that decision at the time that I watch a video, because while the video provides a lot of information, it may not provide you all of the relevant facts. So I think it's important for us to conduct a investigation to ensure that we get all of the available facts and information. And once we do so, then we make that decision, and we let, whether it be the appeal process, the court process, take its place.
Yeah, and I'm talking about 2 days. You're on desk duty till we figure this out. Are y'all doing that? I mean, if there's an allegation of something and it's credible, I know there are a lot of incredible, but if it is credible, how long does it take before you say, turn in your keys, you're on desk duty?
Well, for me, if there's an allegation that makes me believe as an agency head that you're in danger to the public, I'm not putting you on desk duty. I'm putting you on administrative leave. I do not want you on any duty.
And I think, some of the things that we talked about this in the prior meeting, investigations that hang over people's heads for months and months and years are not fair to the public, and it's not fair to the troopers either. I think everybody deserves a quick resolution, as quick as it can be within the Bill of Rights and such. But that's, even the troopers don't like that you can be under investigation for months and months and months when. Anyway, thank you, Colonel.
Thank you, Representative Bacala. Let me just follow up on what you're saying. And Colonel, I'm so happy that you said leadership, because the same person you read in the journal notes who's saying suspending the IAEA investigation pending the criminal investigation is the same person who said that the actions were awful but lawful. So I think we need to make sure that we keep this in its full context and figure out, so whether it was unintentional or intentional that we kept a bad officer on the street, we can all draw our own conclusions. But when you've got that attitude, I would tend to lean on the side that it was intentional. Representative Villio.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Colonel Davis, without I've tried to avoid stepping into the lane of prosecutors. But with regard to the video and internal affairs investigation, quite frankly, there are actions in that video that any prosecutor would tell you is unlawful. Period. End of story. The first time you see it doesn't take a law enforcement perspective, doesn't take a defense perspective, doesn't take a prosecutor's perspective. I think if you got all three in the room, every single discipline would agree that there are actions observed in that video that were unlawful. And so it greatly concerns me that based upon the way things were set up, that trooper and or others were allowed to continue to be on duty when I am all for supporting officers and making sure you have all of the facts in place before you mete out discipline. But when it is glaringly obvious that there is excessive use of force used, that there is no one who can defend it, that individual should not have remained in the employ and out in the public serving without having had some type of discipline. So I think there has to be some consideration of that with regard to investigations going forward. And you're right. It's about taking them off duty. It's perhaps suspending them from the employ while the investigation is occurring. But you cannot leave an individual in the force and not address that for more than a year and expect to have the confidence from the public in the state police. And that's something that has to be addressed without a doubt going forward. And there are many, Colonel, and I know this isn't going to come as a surprise to you, there are many that are going to say that a lot of this came about when you were in high command. And I have no doubt that there are a lot of individuals who are questioning whether or not you are the one to be able to effectively implement these changes. And I hope, time will prove those individuals wrong. You are in the leadership. I take you at your word. And I certainly expect that there will be the changes that there are and will continue to be the changes needed to restore the confidence in the state police, because the hard working men and women of that department, of which there are many, certainly far more than the bad apples, deserve that. The public deserves that. The safety of the law enforcement officers depends upon that, and the safety of the public depends upon that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Villio. I think the board is clear. I just have a couple of questions for you, Colonel.
Sir.
Has anyone, whether it be DA Belton or the AG's office, requested any of the information from your investigations as it relates to Ronald Greene?
Yes, sir. We've turned over all of our information to the federal authorities, and from there, they decided what information they have dispersed to whom from there.
All right, because look, I know there's certainly the criminal aspect of this. There's the legislative aspect that we're dealing with, but I think if we're going to give Ms. Horton full closure, there's also the civil aspect, and I just hadn't heard anything from that. So I'm just wondering, and I'm assuming that lies with the Attorney General's office. Have they requested anything from you?
Not recently, no, sir.
Okay, but they have in the past.
Yes, sir.
All right.
They have.
All right. Again, the board is clear. I don't think we have any other questions. Oh, hold on.
Do you have any closing comments? I know this is enough rough hearing for you. I think you ought to have the opportunity if you would, and even after the next witness if you choose to.
Well, and thank you, sir. Again, I know some people say it's rough for me, but I think back to Ms. Horton and her family, and if it takes me sitting up here, it takes you to get the answers you need to get for us to get to where we need to be, then so be it. And I'm open to that. Ms. Horton, and again, to their family, I am deeply sorry. I can't think of how rough this is for them day in and day out. And that's what's at the forefront of my heart and of my mind. So, me going through this, if it's gonna make any part of their day better, I'll go through it.
All right. Thank you, Colonel.